What if the man everyone ignored was the one keeping this place alive? The register chimed. A smirk, a whisper, a setup in motion. Another shortage, Megan muttered. Troy leaned in. Enough to get him fired. At the dish station, Joe scrubbed plates, his hands raw from years of work, unaware he was being framed. At the counter, a man in a faded t-shirt sat still, holding a burger, staring ahead, watching, waiting. He wasn't just another customer. He was the owner. And tomorrow, someone would pay. Liam Reynolds adjusted the frayed baseball cap low over his brow as he stepped into Reynolds' Grill, his own flagship diner. The bell above the door chimed, but none of his employees so much as glanced up. Perfect. Dressed in a worn hoodie, faded jeans, and sporting 3 days' worth of stubble, he blended in seamlessly. For over a decade, he had built this place from a struggling roadside eatery into a beloved institution with 5 locations across the city. But lately, something had been nagging at him. Customer reviews were as glowing as ever, yet turnover among staff had spiked, and profits at this location, the heart of his empire, had inexplicably dipped. Sliding onto a stool at the far end of the counter, Liam let his gaze sweep the bustling kitchen. The lunch rush was in full swing, wait staff darting between tables, line cooks barking orders, and the register chiming in steady rhythm. At first glance, everything seemed normal, and yet, something was off. That's when he noticed Joe. The elderly dishwasher moved at a pace entirely different from the chaos around him, methodical, deliberate. In his late 70s, with sharp eyes beneath thick silver brows, he carried himself with quiet dignity. While others rushed, he worked with practiced precision, stacking plates with a steadiness that defied the disorder of the kitchen. "What can I get you?" A young cashier, her name tag reading Chloe, finally acknowledged Liam without bothering to look up. "Cheeseburger. Coffee." He slid a 20 across the counter, then nodded toward Joe. "That guy's been here a while?" Chloe rolled her eyes. "Forever. Dude should have retired years ago if you ask me." Liam sipped his coffee, watching Joe closely. He never stopped moving, never hesitated, never complained. Even when a rushed busboy dumped a tray full of greasy dishes into his station, splattering his already soaked apron, the man just wiped his hands and kept working. But then, something curious happened. A woman with 2 young kids approached the register. As she opened her wallet, her face fell. She whispered something to Chloe, who immediately frowned and waved over another cashier, Ethan. They spoke in hushed, impatient tones while the mother grew increasingly distressed. Liam saw Joe pause mid-motion, then quietly dry his hands before shuffling toward the counter. Though he couldn't hear what was said, he watched as Joe discreetly slipped a few bills from his own pocket into Chloe's hand. The relief on the woman's face was immediate. She gathered her kids and left, murmuring tearful thanks. Ethan scoffed as she walked out. "That's the 3rd time this week," he muttered. "Old man's gonna go broke saving deadbeats." Chloe smirked. "Like he isn't broke already? He sleeps in that rust bucket out back." Liam's grip on his coffee tightened. As the hours dragged on, he noticed more. Joe stayed well past the end of his shift, tackling the jobs no one else wanted, scrubbing grease traps, wiping down unseen corners. Twice more, Liam saw him cover for customers who came up short. "Why does he do that?" Liam asked a regular sitting beside him. The man, Tom, a longtime patron, sighed. "Joe? He's a good man. Lost his wife a few years ago. Cancer wiped out their savings. Won't take handouts, though. Too proud. So he keeps working, even though his hands ain't what they used to be." As dinner shift employees began arriving, Joe should have been clocking out. Instead, he grabbed a mop and started cleaning up after others. "Joe, go home," their manager Lisa called from across the diner, exhaustion laced in her voice. "Just finishing up," Joe replied with a tired smile. No harm in lending a hand. Liam noted the way Lisa sighed, like this was routine, like she'd given up trying. Then, at the end of the counter, he caught movement. Chloe and Ethan, whispering. Their eyes flicked toward Joe now and then, their hushed voices carrying just enough for Liam to catch snippets. Then Chloe's voice rang out, loud and clear. "We're short again. Again." Lisa turned on her heel. "How much?" $40, Ethan supplied. "Same as last week." Liam saw Joe straighten at his station, his expression unreadable, but something in the way he set down his rag, carefully, deliberately, made Liam's stomach turn. This wasn't just some unfortunate coincidence. Chloe and Ethan were setting him up. And Joe? The man who had spent the day silently helping others, working beyond his years, refusing to be a burden to anyone. He was about to become their burden. Liam had walked into his diner today looking for business insights. Instead, he had found something far more valuable and far more unsettling. But he wasn't about to stand by and let this play out. Tomorrow, everything would change. Liam sat frozen, his grip tightening on the coffee cup as he processed the sheer cruelty of what he had overheard. They weren't just mocking Joe, they were plotting to frame him. Why? He forced himself to turn another page of his newspaper, straining to hear their answer. Because, Ethan explained, voice dripping with smug satisfaction, I got a cousin who needs a job, young guy, twice as fast as Grandpa over there. If Joe's gone, I can bring him in, and we split the referral bonus. And, Chloe added with a twisted smirk, I'm tired of watching him shuffle around like some charity case. It's pathetic. And the way customers fawn all over him? Oh, Joe, you're so kind. Oh, Joe, you're such a saint. She mimed, gagging. Makes me want to puke. Liam felt his pulse hammering. They were doing this for money? For convenience? Because kindness made them uncomfortable? Tomorrow, Ethan declared. Lisa's doing inventory, so she'll be hyper-focused on the numbers. We'll make sure they don't add up, and we'll make sure Joe's the only explanation. The two sealed their plan with a fist bump before casually breaking apart as a family entered the diner. Liam sat motionless, coffee turning cold in front of him. For the rest of the afternoon, he watched Joe. The elderly man moved with quiet purpose, despite the stiffness in his joints. When a waitress dropped a tray of plates, Joe was the first to help clean up, shielding her from Lisa's irritation. When the coffee machine clogged, he stayed late to fix it properly. And, true to what Liam had seen the day before, when a teenager's card was declined, Joe discreetly slipped some money to Chloe, assuming no one was watching. Why do you let that kid slide? Ethan asked Joe afterward. Joe shrugged, his voice gentle yet unwavering. His mom lost her job last month. He's too proud to ask for help, but I know he's hungry. Sometimes a meal makes all the difference. The moment Joe turned away, Ethan rolled his eyes and shot Chloe a smirk. She snickered. Liam could barely stand it. As closing time approached, he paid his bill and left, but not far. He parked across the street, waiting in his car. When Joe finally emerged nearly an hour past his shift's end, Liam followed at a discreet distance. Joe's ancient Buick sputtered to life, the engine barely hanging on. Instead of heading toward any residential neighborhood, he drove out to the outskirts of town. Liam watched as Joe turned onto a dirt access road behind a stretch of commercial buildings. Hidden behind a cluster of trees was a dilapidated trailer, barely standing. The Buick pulled up and Joe climbed out, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. He trudged up 3 rickety wooden steps, struggling with the stuck door before shouldering it open. A single light flickered on inside. Liam sat in silence, shame washing over him. This is where he lives? He had built a business with the belief that Reynolds Grill was more than just a workplace, that his employees were family. And yet Joe, a man who had given so much, was living in conditions Liam wouldn't wish on a stranger. He needed answers. The next morning, Liam met with a longtime customer, Tom, the man who had spoken fondly of Joe before. How long have you known Joe? Liam asked, still maintaining his disguise. Tom sighed, stirring his coffee. Almost 6 years now. He started working at the diner right after his wife passed. Martha was his whole world. High school sweethearts, married over 50 years. His voice softened. The cancer took everything. Liam's stomach tightened. Everything? Tom nodded. They had a little house on Maple Street. Some savings. But Martha's cancer was aggressive. Needed treatments their insurance wouldn't cover. Joe didn't hesitate. Sold the house, cashed in his retirement, even sold their car. Moved her into the best facility. Gave her every chance. It bought them 8 more months together. Tom's voice thickened. He says those were the best 8 months of his life, even though they were the hardest. Liam swallowed, his throat tight. And after? The bills didn't stop just because she was gone. Tom shook his head. Joe refused to declare bankruptcy, said a debt was a debt. So, he took the dishwashing job. And the trailer? Tom sighed. Best he could afford while still making his payments to the hospital, and sending something to his daughter. Liam frowned. Daughter. She's in Seattle. Wants him to move in with her, but he won't. Says he doesn't want to be a burden. Too proud. Tom hesitated before adding, she doesn't know how bad it is. Joe makes sure of that. Sends her pictures from the diner, makes it sound like business is great. She thinks he's a manager there. Liam clenched his jaw. It got worse. That trailer park, Tom continued. It's being sold to developers. Joe and the other residents have 60 days to move. Rents in this town have gone through the roof. He hasn't told anyone yet. Liam's heart pounded. Where's he going to go? No idea. Tom rubbed his face. His daughter's calling more often, begging him to come stay with her. He won't. Why? Liam asked, voice hoarse. Tom gave him a sad smile. Because of you. Liam blinked. What? Not you personally, Tom clarified. The diner. The people there. He says that helping others gives him purpose, and no matter how little he has, he still wants to give. Liam sat back, stunned. Joe was losing everything, and his biggest concern was whether he could still help the people around him. A hard knot of emotion settled in Liam's chest. He had come here looking for business insights. Instead, he had uncovered something deeper, something wrong. Ethan and Chloe weren't just cruel. They weren't just selfish. They were willing to destroy a good man for their own petty gain. And Liam wasn't going to let it happen. By morning, he would have a plan. By tomorrow, the truth would come to light, and justice would be served at Reynolds' Grill. Liam leaned forward slightly in his booth, his hands curled around his coffee cup, his heart pounding, not with uncertainty, but with the cold, unwavering resolve of a man who had seen enough. The trap was set. Now, all that remained was to spring it. Patricia stared at Megan, her frown deepening. Are you suggesting Henry is stealing? Megan hesitated for only a second before doubling down. I mean, I don't want to accuse anyone unfairly, but the register was short right after he was hanging around. She cast a pointed glance toward the dish station, where Henry was busy scrubbing down trays, unaware of the knives being aimed at his back. Troy nodded, adopting a look of exaggerated sympathy. Look, I like the guy, but people get desperate, especially at his age. No retirement, barely scraping by. Maybe he thought no one would notice if he, helped himself now and then. Liam had to give them credit. They were shameless. Confident. Too confident. Patricia sighed, rubbing her temples. She didn't want to believe it, but between the missing money and the pressure to account for every cent, doubt was creeping in. I'll need to look into this, she murmured. It was time. Liam pushed back from his booth and stood, adjusting his cap. He walked toward the counter just as Patricia exhaled sharply and turned toward the dish station. Henry, she called out. The elderly man looked up, wiping his damp hands on his apron. Yes, ma'am? Can you step over here for a moment? Henry dried his hands a little more thoroughly, then shuffled over. His back was slightly hunched from decades of labor, but his expression was steady, open. Something wrong? Patricia hesitated, but Megan didn't. We've been noticing some, inconsistencies in the register, she said, voice sickly sweet. And you're always around when it happens. Henry blinked. What? Come on, Henry, Troy chimed in, shaking his head as if he were disappointed. We know you've been helping customers cover their meals. Maybe you thought a few extra dollars here and there wouldn't hurt, right? A ripple of murmurs spread through the diner. A few customers had turned in their seats, sensing something unfolding. Henry's face, normally composed, shifted into something Liam had never seen before. Hurt. Genuine, soul-deep hurt. I don't steal, Henry said quietly, but firmly. I've never stolen a thing in my life. But the evidence says otherwise, Megan countered, folding her arms. The register keeps coming up short, and you are always nearby. It's not a great look, Henry. Liam could see the battle happening in real time, the war between Patricia's instincts, which told her this accusation felt wrong, and the mounting pressure of missing money and two employees who seemed so sure. Megan was smirking now, barely suppressing her satisfaction. She thought she had won, and that's when Liam took off his cap. The room went silent. A few employees gasped. One of the line cooks cursed under his breath. Patricia paled. Megan's smirk faltered. Troy looked like he had been punched in the gut. Henry simply blinked, confused by the sudden shift in energy. Liam stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of finality. Let me tell you what I've been noticing, he said. Megan swallowed. Mr. Reynolds, Liam ignored her and turned to Patricia. The security cameras have been broken for months. Is that right? Patricia nodded, still in shock. Liam let that sink in for a moment before turning his gaze back to Troy and Megan. Then how exactly, he asked slowly, coldly, do you two know when and where the register is coming up short? Silence. Megan opened her mouth, closed it. Troy's face drained of color. You plotted this, Liam continued, voice as sharp as a blade. I watched you both manipulate transactions, miscount change, and create fake shortages. And then you tried to pin it all on Henry, someone who's been more of a decent human being than either of you will ever be. A low murmur rippled through the diner. A few customers who had been pretending not to listen were now whispering. Patricia's expression turned from uncertainty to horror. "What? He's lying," Troy blurted, desperation creeping into his voice. "We saw Henry helping a struggling mother cover a meal," Liam cut in smoothly. "And you decided to turn that into a crime. But it wasn't Henry who's been stealing from this diner, was it?" His gaze bore into them. "It was you two." Megan took a step back. "We didn't." "You did," Liam snapped. "And I have proof." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a flick of his thumb, he hit play on a recording. Megan's voice, unmistakable, crackled through the speaker. "Tomorrow, Patricia is doing inventory, so she'll be extra focused on the numbers. We'll make sure they don't add up, and make sure Henry's the only explanation." Gasps erupted from the onlookers. Patricia's face went red with anger. Troy turned to run. "Sit down." Liam's voice was ice. Troy froze mid-step. Megan looked like she was about to cry. "Mr. Reynolds, it was just a joke." "A joke?" Liam's jaw tightened. "You tried to ruin a good man's life. You publicly humiliated him. You stole, and you let him take the blame for it. There's nothing funny about that." He turned to Patricia. "Fire them. Now." Patricia didn't hesitate. "You two, out." Troy opened his mouth as if to protest, but one glance at Liam's expression, and he thought better of it. Megan started to plead. "Please, I need this job." "You should have thought about that before you threw someone else's job under the bus," Patricia shot back. "You have 10 minutes to clear out before I call the cops." As the two former employees scurried away, Liam turned to Henry. For the first time since this had started, the elderly man looked lost, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Liam met his gaze. "You are not leaving this diner." Henry hesitated. "Sir, Liam held up a hand. "Number, listen to me. You are one of the hardest-working, most decent people I have ever met. I should have been here sooner, should have seen what was happening to you. But that's over now." His voice softened. "You're getting a raise, starting today. A real one. And if you ever need anything, you ask. Understood?" Henry blinked rapidly. He cleared his throat, looked down. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet," Liam said with a small smile. "We've got a lot more to fix around here." As he turned back to the rest of the staff, he saw something that had been missing before. Respect. Loyalty. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like Reynolds Grill was finally his again. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Reynolds Grill had ever seen. The diner, once just another busy eatery in a city filled with them, had transformed into something greater. A beacon of what a business could be when it valued people above profit. Henry settled into his new home, a modest but comfortable little house just 3 blocks from the diner. Every morning, as he stepped onto his porch, the reality of his new life still took him by surprise. No more damp, freezing nights in a rusted Buick. No more struggling to stretch his paycheck to cover his late wife's medical debts. And yet, Henry chose to keep working. Not as a dishwasher, but as the floor manager. A role Michael had insisted he deserved. Not as charity, but as recognition for the years of unpaid leadership he had already shown. At first, Henry hesitated. "I don't know anything about management," he'd protested. "You know more than anyone," Michael had replied. "Leadership isn't about paperwork, Henry. It's about people. And you've been leading this place long before I even knew your name." So Henry stayed. And something incredible happened. Employees, new and old, began looking to him for guidance. Waitstaff went to him with their problems before they even thought of going to Patricia. Cooks sought his advice when orders got backed up. Customers spoke his name with familiarity and respect. And, every so often, when a diner visitor came up short on their bill, Henry would still discreetly cover the difference. Only now, he had the official power to do so, through the Henry Lawson Community Fund, which had grown beyond all expectations. Word spread quickly. The story of Reynolds Grill's undercover boss, the kind-hearted dishwasher who had been wrongfully accused, and the justice that followed had made headlines. Locals flooded the restaurant not just for the food, but for what it stood for. Michael kept his promise. Reynolds Grill was no longer just a diner chain. It was a company that took care of its people. All employees received a livable wage, ensuring no one working under Michael's name ever had to live in a car or a crumbling trailer again. Healthcare benefits were extended, including emergency assistance for workers going through financial hardship. A Help Someone Fund was created, allowing employees to contribute small amounts from their paychecks, matched by the company, to assist co-workers or community members in need. The changes were radical for the industry. Other restaurant owners scoffed, calling Michael idealistic, predicting financial losses. But the opposite happened. Reynolds Grill's revenue skyrocketed. Employee turnover plummeted. Customers became fiercely loyal, not just to the brand, but to the people behind it. And for the first time in years, Michael felt proud of his business again. One evening, months after the scandal that had shaken the diner, Henry was wiping down a counter when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Still cleaning up after everyone else? He turned and saw Sarah, his daughter. She stood in the entrance, eyes glistening, clutching her purse like she wasn't sure if she should run toward him or cry. Henry froze. His hands trembled. "Sarah!" Before he could say anything else, she rushed forward and threw her arms around him. "You stubborn, stubborn man," she whispered, her voice breaking. Henry, usually composed, felt his own eyes sting. Michael stood a few feet away, watching quietly. He had flown Sarah in himself, making sure she knew everything. Not just about the hardship Henry had faced, but about the man he had always been. "I wanted to tell you myself," she said, pulling back slightly, wiping her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Dad, but I hate that you've been doing this alone." Henry smiled softly. "Not alone, sweetheart. Never alone." She shook her head, a mix of exasperation and affection in her expression. "You are coming to Seattle, eventually. I won't let you get away with staying here forever." Henry chuckled, his weathered hand resting on hers. "Maybe one day, darling. But right now, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Sarah sighed, defeated, but smiling. They sat down at a booth together, talking for hours, as customers and staff continued with their meals, most of them sneaking fond glances at the reunion unfolding before them. And for the first time in years, Henry allowed himself to think about a future beyond struggle. As for Troy and Megan, their names became cautionary tales in the industry. No reputable restaurant in town would hire them. No employee wanted to work alongside them, because character mattered. They had underestimated not just Henry, but the people who had quietly watched him all those years. In contrast, the Henry Lawson Community Fund continued to grow, fueled by donations from grateful customers, former employees, and even business partners who had been inspired by the story. Years later, when Henry finally did retire, he wasn't forgotten. Michael ensured that every Reynolds Grill location had a small plaque near the entrance, dedicated to Henry Lawson, a man who gave more than he took. Because in the end, wealth wasn't measured by what you had, but by what you gave when you thought no one was watching, and Henry Lawson had left behind a fortune.